Sometimes what I would do is have you talk with one another and share how you paraphrased it. But what I'd like to offer is this. Listening is difficult in and of itself. As you'll come to know when we start doing some of these other exercises, there are many things that can get in the way of us really listening to one another. But one of the greatest gifts we can give to each other is to be able to hear another person's story or testimony or phrase or a sentence and hear it as closely as you possibly faithfully can to how the person was saying it. The reason we start with this quote is because there are a multitude of ways that this quote can be loaded. And specifically for our time together, it can be racially loaded. The word privilege is used a lot. It's often connected with white privilege or racial privilege. And it is easy for us to automatically load all of the things that we've heard about the word privilege lately into this quote. So the two exercises that I've had you do allow you to feel, to acknowledge what you feel when you read it. You know, do I read it and feel convicted? Do I read it and feel afraid? Do I read it and feel upset? Do I read it and feel relief? What's going on in me when I'm trying to listen? I mean, right now we're listening to a quote. It's not even a person who's got other feelings and dynamics and power and all those other things going on. And we still have some sort of reaction to this quote. This is a practice for us to realize that there are going to be reactions to building these relationships. And they're going to be loaded with whatever our experiences taught us, whatever culture has taught us, and whatever is going on in that budding, building relationship. So if we can acknowledge that it's happening, then we can be much more aware of the ways that we try and respond to it. Because if we respond based on our gut reaction to how we feel about a quote, we might shout into the world something, but if we react automatically without thinking about what's going on in us when somebody is giving us their story or sharing something of vulnerability with us, then we can do damage to the relationship that we're trying to build. So the reason that I asked you to try and paraphrase it was to think about what's happening within you as you're hearing this quote or reading this quote. So if your response included anything that had to do with race, that might have been informed by the fact that we're sitting here talking about, you know, building relationships across racial difference. But it may not necessarily have anything to do with this quote. If we had anything to do with white privilege or racial privilege, it may not have anything to do with this quote. At its core, one of the ways we can interpret this quote is to say that every single person has some sort of privilege, which means they have some things that some other folks don't. Use those privileges for good and not evil. That could be one way to paraphrase this. It's not the way. It's just one way. But it doesn't include anything about race, relationships across racial difference, or anything like that. So if we have already loaded it into something, it's something for us to be aware of as we're trying to hear one another. Okay. This is a little tough to see, but it's a list of emotions. It's a list of emotions in ways. So we'll have some materials that we'll be able to make sure that you receive after this training. But one of the ways is to be able to check in with the way that we're responding to even just a quote before we get ready for the real deal, when we start to speak with one another and try and build relationships with one another, person to person. Okay. What I'd like to do next is talk about communication styles. One of the things that can really get in the way of listening is that we have different kinds of communication styles. And we'll do this part fairly quickly, and then I will give you a chance to talk to somebody who's next to you. If you can, maybe on a blank sheet of paper or on the other side of one of your notepad sheets, I'm going to keep this up here, so you don't have to necessarily write all the words in there. Maybe you can just kind of have L on one side and C on the other, and then like a little line in between. The line will be important, because what I'm going to ask you to do is place an X on the line where you are in this continuum. So I'm going to explain what each of the different things are. And so for the first one, you're going to put an X on your line, either toward the linear side or toward the circular side, depending on where you feel like you fall into that. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is going to be up there the whole time. I'm going to explain what each of them means. And basically what we're saying is that there's a horizon between those two areas. Most times someone is not at the total extreme of any one of these. They'll be somewhere along the line. And if you find that you're a person that wants to kind of stay right in the middle, well, sometimes I'm this and sometimes I'm that, pick something that is similar to this kind of gathering. Whether it's like different churches coming together, how would you communicate? Maybe you could think of this very specific thing. If my table were to talk with one another, this is how I would feel most comfortable. Okay? So linear and circular. Linear says there was a past, there's a now, and there's a future. And that's how I tell the story. That was then, this is now, that's going to happen. It's linear. It moves along the line. Some people are very straightforward. Circular is something where we're still going to get there, but we're going to do this as we get there. And we might come back over here and touch on this a little bit, and then we might go forward. You may or may not know of any preachers who start linear and then go into a circular, like a Neo from the Matrix, like that. Now, some of this is a cultural style. In some cultures, telling a story circularly or explaining something in a circular manner is a form of respect, it's a form of community and fellowship. Okay, why am I going to just zip through a story like that? That's not right. So there are different reasons why this happens, but each one of us has a favor toward one or the other. So mark your X, please. The next one is direct or indirect. A lot of this has to do with how much, there's a phrase called saving face. So it's a way of attending to issues without naming them explicitly. So you get there, but you don't come at them straight ahead. So the direct line of communication would be, there's something going on, I'm going to name it explicitly, and then we're going to deal with it explicitly. The indirect form would be something where, even if something is wrong, and even if it needs to be called out, we're going to do it in an indirect manner so that people can come to the conclusion either as a group or on their own. So which one are you? Do you fall in line with the direct, I'm going to name this thing, we're going to deal with it head on? Or are you more an indirect person that would kind of come around the side maybe, or share it in a different kind of way so we could come together as a group and consensus. Is that a United Methodist thing? Consensus? I'm still learning. I just got the G-Corps at the beginning of February, so I'm still learning this thing. Direct, indirect. Okay, formal and informal. I am going to talk about the United Methodist Church with this one because what I have found is in the United Methodist Church there are a lot of people that call each other by their first names. That is very different for me. So I tend to be a title person. I call people by their title. lay people in the church, it's sister or brother so-and-so, or usher so-and-so, or mother so-and-so. But it's very, very difficult for me. I mean, you can see even from my body language right now, I don't even like talking about it. I have a very difficult time calling people by their first name. So I am going to invite Reverend Clark into my conversation right now, because she and I could tell she was starting to think, why did she call me by my first name? Because in the emails back and forth, it was like, Reverend Clark, and then she would sign hers by her first name. And I know that that's a signal to let me know to call her by her first name, but I still couldn't quite do it. And then after we had passed back and forth like 5 or 6 different emails, finally I got the chance. I said, okay, I'm gonna do it. Because she's asking, and that's respectful, and I should do that. So I did it, and then the next round included the district superintendent. So I was like, well, no. So then I was like, greetings, district superintendent Malone, and Reverend Clark, because now she's on email with him. And I was like, well, I can't go back to the first name because that doesn't feel right. But I know in United Methodist circles, a lot of times, people call each other by their first name. So you probably fall somewhere on this line, formal or informal, in the many ways that you think about that. So please place your X.
Are you formal?
With regards to that,
Sister Mary and Brother formal or informal?
formal, yeah, so that would be formal. And usually you're thinking about situations, like not with your family. You're thinking about how do I respond in situations where I'm with a group of people, where I may know some people, maybe I don't know some people. Okay, detached and attached. Really, this is just a way to talk about objective or invested. Now, it doesn't mean that the objective people are not invested at all in what they're talking about. It just means that the objective people like to try and create some space between themselves and what they're talking about. And the people who are thinking about it in an attached way or an invested way are thinking, it's impossible for me to set myself apart from what I'm talking about because I'm talking about it, and that involves me, and so I can't separate myself out. So one way of thinking is the most respectful thing is to pull myself away to be able to speak about it. The other believes that the most respectful way is to admit that I can't pull myself away, that I'm in it no matter what, so I have to talk about it that way. So which one are you? Are you a person that needs to step away and tries to speak about things subjectively? Or are you the person that says, I can't get myself far enough away to speak about it from a different position? Task and relationship, this is one that comes up a lot. Are you more interested in getting the task done? Or are you more interested in building the relationship? I'm just going to look at that one, just like And again, there's not one right or wrong, even though the one that you're not feels wrong. Did you hear me? Even though the one that you're not feels wrong to you, to me. How could you think of that? There's no one, neither one is wrong. Okay, the last one is low context or high context. Low context says, it's kind of like the opposite of what you would think it is. So what we're trying to explain is what happens in the communication. So in low context, the communication itself doesn't have to have a lot of details because the surrounding context has a lot of details that are already set and people know them. The high context says there's got to be a lot of details in the conversation, in the communication, because there's not a lot that's set in the wider. So the way to think about this is what's happening in the communication itself. Think about your church bulletin. Does your church bulletin tell people what door to come in to the church? Does your church bulletin say when to stand or to sit?
Yes.
Does it say when you can't come in and when you can come in? Does it have a little asterisk next to certain things?
Yes.
Does it explain what that asterisk means?
Yes.
So your yeses and your nos are letting you think about what kind of context your church has, right? Does everybody in your church kind of know what happens? So there's less specifically laid out because everybody already believes that the context is already high enough so that the communication is low? Or do we believe that there's not a lot set up and that we have to explain everything so that people can live into our space or our communications? So low context and high context is what's happening in the communication, and it's opposite than what's happening in the context.